Have you ever wondered why the universe seems to favor simplicity? Why does nature, despite its underlying complexity, tend to produce elegant patterns and streamlined solutions? Today, we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating phenomena in science, the emergence of simplicity from complexity over time. This isn't just philosophical musing, it's backed by mathematics, physics, biology, and information theory. So get comfortable, because we're about to explore why complexity inevitably gives way to simplicity across every scale of reality, from quantum mechanics to galactic superclusters, from molecular biology to the evolution of consciousness itself. Let's start with a counterintuitive observation. The early universe was actually simpler than the universe we see today, but in a completely different way. Right after the Big Bang, the universe was an incredibly hot, dense soup of fundamental particles and energy. There were no atoms, no molecules, no stars, no planets, certainly no life. Everything was in thermal equilibrium, which means maximum entropy in one sense, but also perfect uniformity. This uniformity was a kind of simplicity, the simplicity of sameness, of homogeneity. But here's the paradox. As the universe expanded and cooled, it became more complex in terms of structure, yet simpler in terms of the fundamental patterns that govern it. This is the first hint of what we're talking about. Simplicity emerges not as a return to featurelessness, but as the discovery of efficient organizational principles. Consider thermodynamics, specifically the second law. Entropy always increases in a closed system, right? That's what we're taught. But what does entropy really mean? It's not just disorder in the colloquial sense. Entropy is a measure of the number of microstates that correspond to a given macrostate. High entropy means there are many ways the components of a system can be arranged, while still looking the same from the outside. When you have a gas in a box, there are countless ways the individual molecules can be positioned and moving while the gas still appears uniform. That's high entropy. But here's where it gets interesting. Systems naturally evolve toward states that are statistically overwhelmingly probable. And those probable states have a beautiful property. They can be described simply. A gas in thermal equilibrium can be characterized by just a few parameters: temperature, pressure, volume. You don't need to specify the position and velocity of every single molecule. Simplicity emerges from statistical mechanics itself. This principle extends far beyond gases in boxes. Think about phase transitions. Water can exist as ice, liquid, or vapor. Each phase has different properties, different structures at the molecular level. But the transitions between these phases can be described by remarkably simple mathematics. The Ising model, one of the most studied models in statistical physics, uses a simple grid of spins that can point up or down, with interactions only between nearest neighbors. Despite its simplicity, this model exhibits phase transitions that mirror those in real magnetic materials, fluids, and even social systems. The model works because at critical points, systems exhibit scale invariance. They look the same at different magnifications. This self-similarity is another form of simplicity, a fractal-like property where complex behavior reduces to simple scaling laws. Now let's talk about renormalization group theory, which might sound intimidating but reveals something profound about why simplicity emerges. Imagine you're looking at a complex physical system at some microscopic scale. There are countless interactions, particles moving in complicated ways, fields fluctuating. Now zoom out. As you look at larger and larger scales, something remarkable happens. Many of the microscopic details become irrelevant. The system's behavior at large scales depends only on a few key parameters. This process of zooming out and watching details wash away is called coarse graining, and the renormalization group describes how physical laws transform as you change scale. What you discover is that very different microscopic theories can lead to the same large-scale behavior. This is called universality, and it's why water and completely different materials can undergo phase transitions described by the same mathematical exponents. The microscopic complexity doesn't matter. Only a few universal features survive the journey to larger scales. Simplicity emerges through scale. Let's move to biology, where the same principles apply but manifest differently. Life is astonishingly complex. A single bacterial cell contains thousands of different types of molecules, intricate metabolic networks, gene regulatory systems, protein interaction webs. The human body has trillions of cells working in coordination. How can we make sense of this? The answer is that biological systems are organized hierarchically, and at each level of organization, simplicity emerges through modular design. Consider metabolic pathways. At the molecular level, metabolism involves thousands of chemical reactions catalyzed by thousands of enzymes. But these reactions aren't randomly connected. They're organized into pathways and modules. Glycolysis, the citric acid cycle, the electron transport chain, these are functional modules that can be understood largely independently. Each module has a simple input-output relationship, despite complex internal mechanics. This modularity makes biological complexity manageable and allows evolution to tinker with one module without breaking everything else. Evolution itself is a process that generates simplicity from complexity over time, though not in a linear way. Natural selection is often misunderstood as always favoring complexity. But that's not quite right. Selection favors fitness, and fitness often means efficiency. Organisms that can accomplish the same task with fewer resources, less energy, simpler mechanisms, they often outcompete more complicated alternatives. This is why we see convergent evolution, very different lineages independently evolving similar simple solutions to the same problems. Eyes have evolved independently dozens of times. Flight has evolved independently in insects, birds, bats, and pterosaurs. The streamlined body shape of sharks, dolphins, and ichthyosaurs represents convergence on the simple hydrodynamic optimum. These simple forms emerge because physics and chemistry constrain the solution space, and natural selection finds the efficient solutions within that space. There's a concept in evolutionary biology called developmental constraint. Early in the evolution of multicellular life, organisms explored many different body plans. The Cambrian explosion saw tremendous morphological diversity, but over time, certain fundamental body plans became locked in, and subsequent evolution worked as variations on these themes. Why? Because complex developmental programs create dependencies. Change one part, and you might break everything downstream. The simplest body plans that still allow functional complexity are the ones that persist. This is why we don't see endless morphological innovation. We see elaborations on themes, variations on proven designs. Simplicity in basic architecture emerges as a constraint on viable complexity. Now let's dive into information theory, which gives us a mathematical framework for understanding simplicity. Claude Shannon defined information in terms of surprise or uncertainty. The information content of a message depends on how unpredictable it is. A completely random sequence has maximum information per bit. Every bit tells you something you couldn't have predicted. But a completely ordered sequence, like a string of all zeros, has minimal information. You only need to know the pattern once, and you can predict the rest. Here's the key insight. Most systems in nature aren't maximally random. They have structure, which means redundancy, which means they can be compressed. And compressibility is equivalent to simplicity. Algorithmic information theory, developed by Kolmogorov, Solomonoff and Chaitin, makes this precise. The complexity of something is the length of the shortest computer program that can generate it. A random sequence can't be compressed. The shortest program is basically the sequence itself, but a structured sequence can be compressed dramatically. Pi to a million digits can be generated by a short program. That's simplicity. This connects to what we see in nature. Physical laws are compressive algorithms. Newton's laws let you predict the motion of planets without needing to store the position of each planet at each moment. You just need initial conditions and the law of gravitation. General relativity compresses the geometry of spacetime into Einstein's field equations. Quantum mechanics compresses the behavior of particles into the Schrödinger equation. These laws are simple not because reality is fundamentally simple, but because the laws capture regularities that allow for compression. And here's the remarkable thing. The universe appears to be lawful. It exhibits regularities. Those regularities are precisely what allow simplicity to emerge. If the universe were truly random, every moment would require infinite information to describe. But it's not random, it's structured, and that structure permits simple descriptions. Let's talk about critical phenomena and self-organized criticality. Many complex systems naturally evolve toward critical states, poised at the boundary between order and disorder. A sandpile is a classic example. As you slowly add grains of sand, the pile grows until it reaches a critical slope. At this point, adding one more grain might do nothing, or it might trigger an avalanche of any size. The distribution of avalanche sizes follows a power law. There are many small avalanches, fewer medium ones, and rare large ones. This power law distribution is scale invariant, which means it looks the same at different magnifications. No characteristic scale dominates. And power laws are simple. They're described by a single exponent. Self-organized criticality is observed in earthquakes, forest fires, extinction events, neural avalanches in the brain, financial market fluctuations, and countless other systems. These systems self-organize without external tuning to a critical state where simple scaling laws emerge. Complexity fine-tunes itself to produce simplicity. In neuroscience, we see simplicity emerging from the staggering complexity of the brain. The human brain has roughly 86 billion neurons, each forming thousands of connections. The number of possible brain states is astronomical, yet our conscious experience isn't chaotic, it's coherent, structured, purposeful. How? Through massive dimensionality reduction. At any given moment, only a tiny fraction of possible brain states are actually accessible. Neural dynamics constrain the brain to a low-dimensional manifold within the vast state space. When you perform a task, patterns of neural activity can be described by a few principal components, a few modes of coordinated firing. Complex networks of neurons effectively compute simple functions. Population coding lets groups of neurons represent variables reliably even though individual neurons are noisy. The brain discovers simple representations of a complex world through learning and optimization. Machine learning shows us the same principle in artificial systems. Deep neural networks have millions or billions of parameters. The space of possible functions they could represent is incomprehensibly large. Yet when trained on data, these networks learn simple functions, functions that generalize beyond the training data. This is possible because of inductive biases built into the architecture and training process, and because natural data has structure. Images aren't random pixels, they have correlations, patterns, objects. Language isn't random words, it has grammar, semantics, context. Neural networks discover simple latent representations that capture this structure. A network trained to recognize cats doesn't memorize every cat image. It learns a compressed representation, a simple concept of catness. This compression is generalization, and it's why machine learning works at all. Simplicity emerges through learning. Occam's razor, the principle that simpler explanations should be preferred, isn't just a philosophical preference. It's mathematically justified. In Bayesian model selection, you balance the fit of a model to data against the model's complexity. More complex models can fit data more closely, but they also overfit, capturing noise rather than signal. Simpler models, with fewer parameters, make stronger predictions because they're more constrained. The Bayesian framework naturally penalizes complexity through what's called the Occam factor. Given two models that explain the data equally well, the simpler one is assigned higher probability. This isn't arbitrary. It follows from the mathematics of probability. The universe of possible simple explanations is smaller than the universe of possible complex explanations. If a simple explanation fits, it's less likely to be a coincidence. This is why science favors simple theories, not because simplicity is guaranteed to be true, but because it's more likely to be true given that it works. In cosmology, simplicity emerges on the largest scales. Look at the cosmic microwave background, the afterglow of the Big Bang. It's almost perfectly uniform, the same temperature in every direction to within 1 part in 100,000. The tiny variations that do exist follow a nearly scale-invariant power spectrum, predicted by inflationary cosmology. The large-scale structure of the universe, the distribution of galaxies, clusters, and voids, can be characterized by simple statistical measures like the two-point correlation function. Despite containing billions of galaxies, each with billions of stars, the universe's large-scale structure is statistically simple. Why? Because it formed from simple initial conditions amplified by gravity. Quantum fluctuations during inflation, described by simple physics, seeded all the structure we see today. Simplicity at the beginning propagated through complexity to emerge again at cosmic scales. Symmetry is another face of simplicity. Physical laws exhibit symmetries, invariances under certain transformations. The laws of physics are the same everywhere in space, at all times in all directions. They're the same regardless of your velocity, as long as you're not accelerating. These symmetries are profound simplifications. Emmy Noether proved that every continuous symmetry corresponds to a conservation law. Time translation symmetry gives us conservation of energy. Space translation symmetry gives us conservation of momentum. Rotational symmetry gives us conservation of angular momentum. These conservation laws simplify the analysis of physical systems dramatically. You don't need to track every detail, just conserved quantities. Symmetries also constrain the form of physical laws. Maxwell's equations, Einstein's field equations, the standard model of particle physics, all are constrained by symmetry principles. Symmetry is a principle of simplicity, and nature respects it deeply. Let's consider network theory, which applies to everything from the internet to ecosystems to social systems. Many real-world networks are not random. They're structured in simple ways. Small world networks have short path lengths between nodes despite most connections being local. Scale-free networks have degree distributions that follow power laws, with a few highly connected hubs and many poorly connected nodes. These simple topologies emerge from simple growth rules. Preferential attachment, where new nodes connect preferentially to already well-connected nodes, produces scale-free networks. These simple structures have profound consequences for network function, robustness, and dynamics. Diseases spread differently on different network topologies. Information diffuses differently. Failures cascade differently. Understanding the simple underlying topology lets you predict complex emergent behaviors. In chemistry, we see simplicity in periodicity. Dmitri Mendeleev organized elements by atomic weight and noticed that properties repeated periodically. This regularity, now understood through quantum mechanics and electron shell structure, is the periodic table. Despite the diversity of chemical elements and their compounds, properties emerge from simple principles: atomic number, electron configuration, bonding rules. The complexity of chemistry reduces to quantum mechanics plus electromagnetism. Simple rules governing electrons and nuclei explain the vast diversity of matter. This is reductionism at its most powerful, complex phenomena reduced to simpler underlying principles. But reductionism isn't the whole story. Emergence is equally important. Emergent properties are those that appear at higher levels of organization, but can't be easily predicted from lower levels, even though they're ultimately consequences of lower-level laws. Wetness emerges from collections of water molecules, but isn't a property of individual molecules. Consciousness emerges from neurons, but isn't a property of individual neurons. These emergent properties can often be described simply at their own level, even when the underlying details are complex. Fluid dynamics can be described by the Navier-Stokes equations without referencing individual molecules. Economics can be modeled with supply and demand curves without tracking every transaction. Simplicity emerges at each level of description, appropriate to that level. In mathematics itself, we see simplicity emerging through abstraction. Mathematicians look for patterns, commonalities across different contexts. Group theory abstracts the notion of symmetry. Category theory abstracts the notion of mathematical structure itself. These abstractions are simplifications. They strip away details to reveal essential relationships. A group can represent rotations, permutations, or arithmetic operations, all unified by the same simple axioms. This abstraction lets you prove theorems once and apply them everywhere. It's cognitive compression, allowing finite minds to grasp infinite complexity by identifying the simple core. Chaos theory taught us that simple rules can produce complex behavior. The logistic map, a simple equation with one parameter, exhibits a route to chaos as the parameter increases. The Lorentz system, three coupled differential equations, produces the famous butterfly attractor. These systems are deterministic, no randomness, but unpredictable in practice because of sensitive dependence on initial conditions. Yet even chaos has structure. Chaotic attractors have fractal geometry. Their dimension, Lyapunov exponents, and other properties can be characterized simply. And strange attractors, while complex in detail, confine the system's dynamics to a low-dimensional subspace of the full-state space. Even chaos is simpler than pure randomness. In economics and social sciences, simple models often outperform complex ones. The efficient market hypothesis reduces market dynamics to a simple idea. Prices reflect all available information. Supply and demand curves are simple, yet powerful for prediction. Game theory reduces strategic interactions to simple payoff matrices. These simplifications work not because social systems are fundamentally simple, but because they capture essential regularities. Human behavior, though complex in detail, exhibits statistical regularities. People respond to incentives. Markets tend toward equilibrium. These regularities allow simple models to be useful, even if they're not perfect. Language itself is a system where simplicity emerges. Natural languages have enormous complexity, irregular verbs, exceptions, idioms, context-dependent meanings. Yet all languages have grammar, structure that can be described by rules. Chomsky's universal grammar posits that all human languages share deep structural similarities, rooted in our cognitive architecture. The space of possible human languages is a tiny subset of the space of all possible communication systems. Children acquire language rapidly because the underlying structure is simple enough to be learnable from limited data. The complexity of language use emerges from simple recursive rules applied creatively. Now let's think about evolution of technology. Technologies tend to become simpler over time, not in the sense of doing less, but in the sense of being easier to use. Early computers required expert knowledge, punch cards, arcane commands. Modern computers have graphical interfaces, touch screens, voice control. The underlying complexity has increased. Modern software and hardware are vastly more intricate, but the user interface has simplified. This is abstraction, hiding complexity behind simple interfaces. The same pattern appears everywhere. Early automobiles required manual cranking, adjusting chokes, constant maintenance. Modern cars start with a button. Complexity is encapsulated in modules that present simple interfaces to users. This is intentional design for simplicity, but it mirrors natural processes. In artificial intelligence, we're seeing simplicity emerge in unexpected ways. Large language models are trained on massive datasets with billions of parameters. The training process is complex. The model internals are opaque. Yet these models discover simple, interpretable representations of concepts. Probing studies show that networks learn disentangled representations, separate neurons or directions in activation space, corresponding to distinct semantic concepts. This wasn't explicitly programmed. It emerged from the optimization process. The models compress human knowledge into their weights, and compression requires finding simple structure. This is the same principle as before. Learning is compression, and compression reveals simplicity. Let's return to physics and discuss effective field theory, which formalizes the emergence of simplicity across scales. In particle physics, we have the Standard Model, which describes particles and forces at the smallest scales we've probed. But we don't need the full Standard Model to describe nuclear physics, and we don't need nuclear physics to describe chemistry, and we don't need chemistry to describe thermodynamics. At each scale, an effective theory describes the relevant physics using appropriate degrees of freedom. High-energy details are integrated out, absorbed into parameters of the effective theory. This is why physics works as a layered cake of theories, each simple within its domain. Newtonian mechanics is an effective theory valid at low velocities and weak gravity. It's simpler than general relativity, but perfectly adequate for engineering. Effective theories are simple by design, capturing only what matters at a given scale. Black holes offer a striking example of simplicity, emerging from complexity. A black hole can form from the collapse of a massive star, an incredibly complex process involving nuclear reactions, turbulent fluid dynamics, magnetic fields, and more. Yet once formed, a black hole is characterized by just three parameters: mass, charge, and angular momentum. The no-hair theorem states that all other information is lost, or at least hidden behind the event horizon. Two black holes with the same mass, charge, and spin are identical, regardless of what they formed from. This is dramatic simplification. Enormous complexity collapses to three numbers. Thermodynamics of black holes mirrors this. Black holes have entropy proportional to their surface area, not volume. This suggests that all the information about what fell in is somehow encoded on the two-dimensional horizon, a holographic simplification of three-dimensional complexity. Holography, more generally, suggests that the universe might be simpler than it appears. The holographic principle, inspired by black hole physics, proposes that the information content of a region of space is proportional to its surface area, not its volume. This implies that our three-dimensional universe might be equivalent to a two-dimensional theory, defined on its boundary. If true, this is a profound simplification, one dimension eliminated from the fundamental description. String theory exploits this through the AD-SCFT correspondence, which relates a gravitational theory in higher dimensions to a non-gravitational theory in lower dimensions. These are speculative ideas, but they point toward deep simplifications hidden in the structure of reality. In ecology, simplicity emerges in food webs and energy flow. Ecosystems involve countless species with intricate interactions, yet energy flow through ecosystems follows simple patterns. Primary producers capture solar energy. Herbivores eat producers. Carnivores eat herbivores. At each level, roughly 90% of energy is lost to heat and metabolism. This tenfold rule is a simple regularity that emerges from thermodynamics applied to biology. Species abundances often follow simple distributions. The metabolic theory of ecology relates organism size to metabolic rate through simple power laws. These regularities make ecology, despite its complexity, amenable to quantitative science. The concept of attractors in dynamical systems provides another lens on emergent simplicity. A dynamical system evolves according to rules, but over time, its behavior may settle into an attractor, a region of state space that the system enters and doesn't leave. Attractors can be fixed points, limit cycles, or strange attractors. Regardless of the initial condition within the basin of attraction, the system ends up exhibiting the same long-term behavior. This is simplification through dynamics. The multitude of possible initial conditions funnels down to simple, predictable long-term behavior. Ecosystems may settle into stable states. Climate may settle into attractor states corresponding to ice ages or warm periods. The brain's dynamics settle into attractor states corresponding to memories or decisions. Let's think about crystallization and pattern formation. When water freezes, molecules arrange themselves into a crystalline lattice. The liquid state has molecules in random positions, high entropy, complex to describe individually. The solid state has a regular, repeating structure, low entropy in one sense but simple to describe. You only need to specify the crystal lattice and lattice constant, and you know where every molecule is. Simplicity emerges through symmetry breaking. The liquid is symmetric, looks the same in all directions. The crystal breaks this symmetry by choosing particular directions for its axes. But the broken symmetry state is more ordered, more predictable, simpler to describe despite being less symmetric. Turing patterns are another example of simplicity from complexity. Alan Turing showed that simple reaction-diffusion equations can produce stable spatial patterns, spots, stripes, spirals. These patterns emerge from the interplay of two processes, a reaction that amplifies differences and diffusion that smooths them out. With the right balance, small random fluctuations grow into regular patterns. This mechanism is thought to underlie animal coat patterns, fingerprints, desert vegetation, and more. Simple rules, complex initial conditions, simple emergent patterns. In computer science, algorithmic simplicity is a driving force. Programmers strive to write clean, simple code. Why? Because simple code is easier to understand, debug, and modify. Complex, convoluted code is fragile. Small changes break it in unpredictable ways. Refactoring is the process of simplifying code without changing its functionality. The Unix philosophy emphasizes small, simple programs that do one thing well and can be combined. Modularity, abstraction, encapsulation, all are techniques for managing complexity by creating simple interfaces around complex internals. The success of software engineering depends on our ability to impose simplicity on inherently complex systems. Occam's razor appears again in model selection for data science. Given data, infinitely many models could fit it, but most are overly complex, fitting noise rather than signal. Regularization techniques penalize complexity, pushing models toward simplicity. Lasso regression shrinks coefficients toward zero, effectively selecting a subset of variables. Pruning decision trees prevents overfitting by limiting depth. Dropout in neural networks randomly deactivates neurons during training, preventing co-adaptation and encouraging simpler, more robust representations. These techniques work because simpler models generalize better. They've learned the simple underlying pattern rather than memorizing the data. In quantum mechanics, simplicity appears in unexpected places. The wave function of a complex system lives in a high-dimensional space, Hilbert space, with dimensions equal to the product of dimensions for each particle. For macroscopic systems, this is absurdly large. Yet entanglement, while complex in principle, often has simple structure. Many body ground states can be efficiently represented by matrix product states, a compressed form that exploits limited entanglement. Quantum computers leverage this. Certain problems that seem to require exponentially large classical computations can be solved efficiently using quantum superposition and entanglement. The simplicity here is subtle. It's a simplicity of quantum information structure that classical descriptions miss. Let's consider the arrow of time. Why does time have a direction? Why do we remember the past but not the future? The answer lies in entropy. The second law says entropy increases, but why? The standard answer is statistical. There are more high-entropy states than low-entropy states, so systems evolve from less probable to more probable states. But this just pushes the question back. Why was the entropy low in the past? This is the problem of initial conditions. The early universe had very low entropy, a simple, smooth, homogeneous state. As the universe evolved, entropy increased, structure formed, complexity grew. Yet this complexity is built on a foundation of initial simplicity. The arrow of time emerges from the asymmetry between a simple past and a complex present. Predictability is linked to simplicity. Chaotic systems are unpredictable in detail but predictable in distribution. Weather is chaotic, so we can't forecast precisely more than a week or so ahead. But we can predict climate, average conditions over long times, quite well. Climate is simpler than weather because it averages over chaos. Similarly, quantum mechanics is probabilistic for individual events, but highly predictable statistically. We can't predict when a particular atom will decay, but we can predict half-lives with precision. Simplicity emerges through statistics, through averaging over microscopic unpredictability. In geology, we see simplicity in plate tectonics. The Earth's surface is divided into a small number of large plates that move relative to each other. This simple picture explains earthquakes, volcanoes, mountain building, ocean floor spreading, and more. Underneath is complex convection in the mantle, intricate chemistry, temperature gradients. But the large-scale behavior reduces to the kinematics of rigid plates. This is effective theory applied to geophysics, complex underlying dynamics producing simple emergent behavior. The principle of least action in physics is a statement of simplicity. Classical mechanics can be derived from the principle that systems follow the path that extremizes the action, a particular integral over time. This principle is elegant and simple, yet it contains all of Newtonian mechanics. Quantum mechanics generalizes this. Particles take all possible paths, weighted by the action. The principle of least action reflects a deeper simplicity in the laws of nature, a variational principle that nature seems to follow. Feedback loops in complex systems often drive simplification. Negative feedback stabilizes systems, pulling them toward equilibrium. Thermostats, homeostasis in biology, market corrections in economics. All use negative feedback to maintain simple, stable states despite perturbations. Positive feedback can drive systems to extremes, but even then, saturation effects eventually limit growth, leading to new stable states. Feedback organizes complexity, creating simple dynamic equilibria. Let's talk about the human genome. It contains about 3 billion base pairs, which sounds enormously complex. Yet much of it is non-coding, and the coding regions follow simple rules. Triplets of bases code for amino acids according to the genetic code. This is a simple cipher. Gene expression is regulated by networks, but these networks have motifs, simple recurring circuits like feedback loops and feed-forward loops. The complexity of biology isn't arbitrary. It's modular, hierarchical, and built from simple regulatory motifs repeated and combined. This makes it possible for evolution to explore the space of viable organisms, and for scientists to reverse engineer biological systems. In the study of phase transitions, we encounter critical exponents, which are universal. Different systems undergoing phase transitions, magnets, fluids, alloys, exhibit the same exponents, placing them in the same universality class. This universality is a profound simplification. It means that microscopic details don't matter. Only a few key features like dimensionality and symmetry determine the critical behavior. This was unexpected and revolutionary when discovered. It means that simple models, stripped of all realistic detail, still capture the essential physics of real systems near criticality. Simplicity through universality. The evolution of cooperation in game theory shows how simple strategies can emerge from complex interactions. In Iterated Prisoner's Dilemma, the simple strategy tit for tat, cooperate first, then copy your opponent's last move, performs remarkably well. It's simple, forgiving, and retaliatory. More complex strategies don't necessarily do better. This suggests that in social interactions, simplicity and transparency can be advantageous. Evolution might favor simple, understandable strategies because they facilitate coordination. In music, we find simplicity in scales and harmony. The 12-tone equal temperament scale is a compromise that allows simple ratios of frequencies to approximate consonant intervals. The mathematical relationships between notes, octaves, fifths, fourths, are simple ratios. This isn't arbitrary, it's rooted in physics. Consonance arises from simple frequency ratios because they minimize beating and align harmonics. Our brains find these simple mathematical relationships pleasing. Music theory, built on these simple ratios, allows the construction of immensely complex and beautiful compositions. Visual perception also reveals simplicity. The Gestalt principles of perception, proximity, similarity, continuity, closure, describe how we organize visual information into simple wholes. Our visual system doesn't process every pixel independently. It groups, segments, and interprets. We see objects, not pixels. This is massive dimensionality reduction. The visual cortex extracts edges, then combines them into contours, then recognizes shapes and objects. Each stage simplifies, abstracts, reduces complexity. By the time information reaches higher visual areas, the representation is sparse and simple, object identities, not raw sensory data. Language processing in the brain works similarly. We don't remember exact wording, we remember meaning. This is compression. Semantic memory is simpler than verbatim memory. We extract the gist, the essence, and discard surface details. This allows us to generalize, to apply knowledge to new situations. It's why analogies work, why we can communicate abstract concepts. Simplicity in representation enables flexible cognition. Optimization problems often have simple optimal solutions. In operations research, Linear programming finds optimal allocations by searching vertices of a polytope. The optimal solution is at a vertex, a simple point characterized by a few binding constraints. In control theory, optimal control often reduces to bang-bang control, switching between extremes rather than fine-tuned intermediate values. Simplicity emerges from optimization under constraints. The unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in the natural sciences, as Wigner put it, may be related to this emergence of simplicity. Mathematics is the study of patterns, structures, and relationships in their purest, simplest form. Nature exhibits regularities, and mathematics describes regularities. The match isn't mysterious, it's because both are about simplicity. Physical laws are simple because simple laws are compressible, memorable, and selectable. Life and intelligence arise because they exploit regularities, and mathematics is the language of regularity. Now, consider error-correcting codes, which are used in digital communication and storage. Data is transmitted through noisy channels that flip bits. Without error correction, the received message would be corrupted. Error-correcting codes add redundancy in a structured way so that errors can be detected and corrected. The code is simpler than the raw data plus noise. It separates signal from noise. This is information theory applied to communication. The emergence of a clean, simple message from a noisy channel mirrors how signal emerges from noise in many natural systems. In astronomy, Kepler's laws are simple. Planets move in ellipses, sweep out equal areas in equal times. Orbital period squared is proportional to semi-major axis cubed. These laws are empirical regularities Kepler, found in Tycho Brahe's meticulous observations. Newton later derived them from his law of gravitation and laws of motion, showing that simple laws at a deeper level produce simple laws at a higher level. But even before Newton, Kepler's laws simplified the description of planetary motion, enormously compared to the epicycles of Ptolemaic astronomy. Simplicity can be discovered empirically and then explained theoretically. The standard model of cosmology, lambda CDM, has only 6 parameters, yet it describes the large-scale structure and evolution of the universe with remarkable accuracy. 6 numbers to describe the entire cosmos. This is astonishing simplification. The parameters are things like the density of matter, the density of dark energy, the amplitude of initial fluctuations. From these, you can predict the cosmic microwave background anisotropies, the distribution of galaxies, the expansion history. Of course, these 6 parameters hide complexity. We don't know what dark matter or dark energy are, but the predictive power of the model testifies to the simplicity of large-scale cosmology. In psychology, cognitive biases and heuristics are simple rules of thumb that our minds use. They're not always accurate, but they're efficient. The availability heuristic. Judge probability by how easily examples come to mind. The representativeness heuristic. Judge category membership by similarity to a prototype. These are simple, fast, and usually good enough. Our brains evolved to solve problems with limited resources, so they use simple strategies. This is bounded rationality. Full rationality would require infinite computation. Simplicity is a practical necessity. Economics of scale and scope also relate to simplicity. As production scales up, per-unit costs often decrease. Why? Because fixed costs are spread over more units and processes become more efficient. Specialization increases, which is a form of simplification. Each worker does one simple task rather than many complex tasks. The assembly line is an example. Complex product assembly is broken into simple, repetitive steps. Simplicity in individual tasks enables mass production. In materials science, we see simplicity in properties that depend only on a few variables. The strength of metals, for example, depends on composition, grain size, and processing history, but can be predicted by relatively simple models. Dislocations, defects in crystal lattices, govern plastic deformation, and their behavior can be modeled with simple equations. Despite the astronomical number of atoms in a piece of metal, its mechanical properties emerge from simple collective behaviors. The phenomenon of spontaneous symmetry breaking illustrates how simple asymmetric states emerge from symmetric laws. The Higgs mechanism, which gives particles mass, involves a field that could be zero everywhere, maintaining symmetry. But the lowest energy state is not zero. It's a non-zero value, and the field picks a particular direction in an abstract space. This breaks the symmetry, but the broken state is simple. The field has a constant value. The complexity of the symmetric state, infinite possibilities, resolves into the simplicity of one chosen state. Let's think about narratives and storytelling. Stories simplify reality. They impose structure, beginning, middle, end. They identify protagonists, antagonists, conflicts, resolutions. Real life is messy, ambiguous, multifaceted. Stories extract a simple arc from complexity. This simplification is powerful. It helps us make sense of experience, communicate lessons, build culture. Myths, parables, fables, all are vehicles of simplicity that carry meaning across generations. In law and governance, simplicity emerges in the form of precedents and principles. Case law builds up over time, but common threads and principles emerge. Rather than treating each case as unique, legal systems identify relevant precedents and apply consistent principles. This simplifies adjudication and creates predictability. Constitutions and foundational laws are simple documents that set out basic principles, leaving details to be worked out. Artificial life simulations, like Conway's Game of Life, show how simple rules lead to emergent complexity, and then to simple emergent structures. The Game of Life has 4 simple rules governing cells on a grid. From random initial conditions, patterns emerge: stable blocks, oscillators, gliders that move across the grid. These emergent structures are simple, stable, and can be classified. Complex initial conditions settle into simple, predictable behaviors. In the brain, synaptic pruning is a process where excess neural connections are eliminated. Young children have more synapses than adults. As the brain matures, connections that aren't used are pruned away. This simplifies neural circuits, making them more efficient. The brain sculpts itself, removing complexity to optimize function. Learning, in a sense, is as much about what to ignore as what to attend to. Simplification through selective elimination. Minimalism in art and design reflects an aesthetic preference for simplicity. Stripping away ornamentation to reveal essential form. This isn't just taste, it often improves function. Simple designs are easier to use, easier to manufacture, more robust. The Bauhaus movement emphasized form follows function and sought simplicity in design. Dieter Rams's principles of good design emphasize simplicity and clarity. These principles resonate because simplicity aligns with how our minds process information. The concept of degrees of freedom in physics captures the idea that not all microscopic details are independent or relevant. A rigid body has 6 degrees of freedom, 3 translational and 3 rotational, regardless of how many atoms it contains. This dramatic reduction in complexity makes mechanics tractable. Similarly, in thermodynamics, the state of a gas is determined by a few macroscopic variables, not the positions and velocities of all molecules. Reducing degrees of freedom is simplification. Causality itself is a simplifying principle. We organize the world into causes and effects, even though the underlying physics is often more complex, involving correlations and feedback. By identifying causal relationships, we can predict and control. If a cause is B, we can manipulate A to change B. This is a simplification. Reality is a web of interactions, but it's a useful simplification that enables science and technology. Abstraction in software engineering hides complexity behind interfaces. Object-oriented programming encapsulates data and behavior. A user of a class doesn't need to know how it's implemented, only what interface it provides. This modularity allows large programs to be built by teams without everyone needing to understand every detail. Abstraction is enforced simplicity, managing complexity by hiding it. Conservation laws, as mentioned earlier, are simplifications. Energy is conserved, so we can track it without worrying about the details of how it's transformed. Momentum is conserved, simplifying collision problems. Charge is conserved, simplifying electrical circuits. These laws are consequences of symmetries, and they drastically reduce the information needed to analyze physical systems. The weak force and strong force in particle physics are described by gauge theories, which have a beautiful mathematical simplicity. Yang-Mills theories, the framework for these forces, are based on symmetry groups. The requirement of local gauge invariance, symmetry at every point in space, determines the form of interactions. From simple symmetry principles, the complexity of particle interactions emerges, but the underlying theory is simple, elegant, based on group theory. Simplicity isn't always the whole story. Some systems resist simplification. Turbulence is an example. The Navier-Stokes equations are simple, but turbulent flows are extraordinarily complex. We don't have a complete understanding of turbulence, and it may be that no simple description exists for all aspects. But even in turbulence, statistical properties, energy spectra, scaling laws, exhibit regularities. Simplicity emerges in the statistics, if not in the details. The brain's default mode network becomes active when we're not focused on the external world. It's involved in mind-wandering, self-referential thought, imagining the future. This network's activity has a simple, coherent structure despite being distributed across many brain regions. It simplifies the brain's resting state into a low-dimensional mode of activity. The Pareto principle, or 80-20 rule, is an empirical observation that roughly 80% of effects come from 20% of causes. This isn't a universal law, but it appears in many contexts: wealth distribution, sales, software bugs, etc. It implies that simplification is possible. Focus on the vital few rather than the trivial many. This heuristic simplifies decision-making and resource allocation. In chemistry, the octet rule simplifies bonding. Atoms tend to form bonds until they have 8 electrons in their valence shell. This isn't rigorous. There are many exceptions, but it's a simple rule that explains a lot of chemical behavior. Simplicity as a pedagogical tool, even when not perfectly accurate, helps build understanding. Finally, let's return to the philosophical implications. Why does simplicity emerge? Because complexity without structure is rare. Random complexity is just noise. Structured complexity, complexity with patterns, regularities, compressibility, is what we observe. And structure implies simplicity at some level. The universe is governed by laws, and laws are compressions, simplifications. Evolution favors efficiency, which is simplicity of means. Cognition requires compression, which is simplification of representation. Technology advances through abstraction, which is simplification of interface. At every level, from physics to biology to culture, simplicity emerges because it's favored. By the mathematics of probability, by the dynamics of evolution, by the constraints of computation, by the aesthetics of understanding. Simplicity isn't the absence of complexity. It's the presence of structure within complexity. It's the discovery that despite a multitude of possibilities, reality follows patterns. Those patterns can be expressed simply, and that simplicity is what allows us to comprehend, predict, and navigate the world. This is the deep reason why simplicity emerges over time. Because in a lawful universe, in a system subject to evolution and optimization, in minds limited by computational resources, simplicity is not just preferred, it's inevitable. The complex reduces to the simple because the simple is what survives, what works, what can be grasped and transmitted. Simplicity is the attractor toward which systems evolve, the fixed point toward which understanding converges, the essence distilled from the noise of existence. The emergence of simplicity operates at scales we can barely fathom. Consider the cosmic web, the largest known structure in the universe. Galaxy clusters aren't distributed randomly but form filaments and sheets surrounding vast voids, creating a foam-like structure. This pattern emerges from initial density fluctuations, amplified by gravity over billions of years. Despite involving trillions of galaxies, each containing billions of stars, the structure can be simulated and understood through relatively simple physics: gravity, dark matter dynamics, and cosmological expansion. This convergence across scales and domains hints at something profound. Mathematical structures that appear in completely different contexts, fractals in coastlines and in market fluctuations, power laws in earthquake magnitudes and in city sizes, exponential growth in bacterial populations and in compound interest, suggest that simplicity isn't imposed on nature but discovered within it. These mathematical forms are attractors in the space of possible behaviors. Systems don't need to know mathematics, they simply follow local rules, and mathematics describes the emergent patterns. This is why the same differential equations appear in mechanics, electricity, fluid flow, and heat transfer. The equations capture universal relationships between rates of change, relationships that transcend specific physical implementations. Let's delve deeper into information theory and its connection to physics. Landor's principle establishes that erasing information requires energy, specifically, at least kT ln2 of energy per bit erased, where K is Boltzmann's constant and T is temperature. This connects information, a seemingly abstract concept, to physical thermodynamics. It suggests that information is physical, not merely a description of physical systems. When a system evolves and loses information about its past, when memory is erased by entropy increase, energy must be dissipated. This principle has profound implications. It means that computation has a thermodynamic cost. Irreversible computations which erase intermediate results generate heat. This is why your computer needs cooling. Reversible computation which preserves information could theoretically approach zero energy dissipation, though practical implementations face enormous challenges. The connection goes deeper. The black hole information paradox asks whether information that falls into a black hole is destroyed or preserved. Hawking initially argued it was destroyed, violating quantum mechanics unitarity. But subsequent work suggests information is preserved, encoded in subtle correlations in Hawking radiation or on the event horizon itself. The resolution involves holography and quantum entanglement in ways we're still working to understand. But the key point is that information conservation is a fundamental principle, on par with energy conservation. The universe preserves information, and this constraint shapes how systems evolve. Simplicity emerges partly because information must be conserved. It can be scrambled, diluted, or hidden, but not destroyed. This limits the space of possible evolutions. Quantum entanglement presents another face of simplicity, emerging from complexity. When particles become entangled, Their combined state cannot be described by specifying each particle's state independently. The system as a whole has a simple, pure state, but subsystems are in mixed states, maximally complex in a sense. Yet measurement on one particle instantaneously affects the other, no matter the distance. This non-local correlation seems complex, but it's governed by simple rules: the tensor product structure of Hilbert space and the projection postulate. Entanglement is being harnessed for quantum computing and quantum cryptography precisely because its mathematical structure, though counterintuitive, is simple and well understood. We've moved from viewing entanglement as a strange anomaly to recognizing it as a resource, a simple feature of quantum mechanics that enables powerful technologies. Let's consider algorithmic complexity more carefully. Kolmogorov complexity defines the complexity of a string as the length of the shortest program that generates it. This measure is uncomputable in general. You can't always find the shortest program, but it's a profound concept. It formalizes the intuition that some sequences are random while others have structure. A key result is that most strings are incompressible, meaning most strings are random, but the universe we observe is not random. The patterns we see, galaxies, crystals, DNA, consciousness, are highly compressible. They're special, improbable states. Why? The answer involves initial conditions and selection. The universe began in a low-entropy, simple state. As it evolved, entropy increased, but structure formed because gravity is attractive and creates inhomogeneities. Life emerged because replicators that can harness energy gradients persist. Observers exist because complex structures capable of modeling their environment survive. We see compressible patterns because we're part of those patterns, and because only compressible patterns can give rise to observers. This anthropic reasoning is controversial but relevant. If the universe had different fundamental constants, life might not exist. We observe this universe because we can't observe universes without observers. This selection effect means we shouldn't be surprised that the universe appears fine-tuned for complexity. It's not fine-tuned in all respects. Most of the universe is inhospitable to life, but the laws permit complexity, and we exist in a region where complexity flourishes. Simplicity of physical laws combined with specific initial conditions leads to the rich complexity we observe, from which simple patterns emerge again at various scales. It's a hierarchy: simple laws, complex initial evolution, emergent simple structures. Renormalization in quantum field theory deserves deeper exploration. In particle physics, calculations initially yielded infinite results, energies and probabilities blowing up due to contributions from arbitrarily short distances. Renormalization showed how to systematically handle these infinities by absorbing them into redefined parameters like mass and charge. The physical predictions are finite and match experiments with stunning precision, but renormalization is more than a trick. It reveals that physics at different scales decouples. High-energy processes affect low-energy physics only through a few parameters. This is why effective field theories work. You don't need to know the full quantum theory of gravity to do chemistry. The high-energy details are integrated out, leaving a simple low-energy theory. Simplicity emerges through decoupling of scales. Symmetry breaking is central to modern physics. The early universe was hot and symmetric. As it cooled, symmetries broke sequentially. Electroweak symmetry breaking separated the electromagnetic and weak forces, giving mass to particles through the Higgs mechanism. Chiral symmetry breaking in quantum chromodynamics gives mass to protons and neutrons. Each symmetry breaking is a phase transition, a simplification in the sense that the broken phase has definite structure, definite properties, rather than the fuzzy symmetric phase. The concept extends beyond physics. In human societies, symmetry breaking occurs when a group coordinates on a convention, driving on the right side of the road, for example. The symmetric state where everyone drives randomly is chaotic. Breaking symmetry by choosing one side creates order, simplicity, functionality. Pattern formation in biology is governed by reaction-diffusion mechanisms, but also by mechanical forces and gene regulatory networks. Somatogenesis, the formation of vertebrate segments, involves a molecular clock that oscillates with a regular period, creating somites sequentially. This is a simple, robust mechanism that produces repeated structures. The periodicity of somites, the segmentation of insects, the phyllotaxis of plant leaves, all emerge from simple developmental rules iterated over time and space. Evo-devo, evolutionary developmental biology, shows that morphological diversity arises from variations in simple regulatory mechanisms. Changing the timing or location of gene expression can produce dramatic changes in form. Simplicity in developmental programs enables both robustness and evolvability. The evolution of the eye illustrates complexity arising from simplicity and then being simplified. The first light-sensitive cells were simple patches of photoreceptors. Over time, they invaginated to form cups, improving directionality. Lenses evolved to focus light. Multiple cell types specialized, rods for low light, cones for color. Neural processing became sophisticated, with edge detection and motion sensitivity. The mature eye is complex, but it evolved through incremental steps, each adaptive. And at each stage, there's functional simplicity. The eye as a whole has a simple job: gather light and send signals to the brain. Internal complexity serves external simplicity of function. This is design principle in engineering: hide complexity behind simple interfaces. Language evolution mirrors this. Early hominins likely had simple vocalizations, calls associated with specific stimuli or emotions. Over time, these became more flexible, detached from immediate context. Syntax emerged, allowing combination of symbols into infinite novel sentences. Recursion, the ability to embed clauses within clauses, enables expressing arbitrarily complex thoughts. Yet the rules of grammar, while intricate in their full description, are simple in their core. Phrases combine hierarchically, relationships are marked consistently. Children acquire language rapidly because the underlying structure is simple enough to infer from limited data. Universal grammar, if it exists, is a simplification, constraints on possible languages that make language learnable. Without such constraints, the space of possible communication systems would be too vast to search. Cultural evolution also exhibits simplification. Early human cultures had complex mythologies, elaborate rituals, intricate kinship systems. Over time, some cultures developed writing, codifying knowledge and simplifying transmission. Religions sometimes moved from polytheism to monotheism, a conceptual simplification. Legal codes emerged, simplifying dispute resolution. Scientific understanding replaced complex mythological explanations with simpler mechanistic ones. Thunder isn't Thor's hammer, it's rapidly expanding air from lightning. The germ theory of disease simplified medicine. Many illnesses have a common cause type, pathogens, rather than miasmas, imbalances of humors or curses. Each scientific revolution is a simplification, a deeper explanation that unifies previously disparate phenomena. Let's think about markets and economics more carefully. Adam Smith's invisible hand is a simplification. Individual self-interest leads to collective benefit through market mechanisms. This isn't always true, market failures exist, but it captures a real emergent property of decentralized exchange. Prices aggregate information. In a well-functioning market, The price of a good reflects all available information about supply and demand. No central planner is needed. This is a powerful simplification, reducing complex coordination problems to simple price signals. Hayek emphasized this in his work on the knowledge problem. Dispersed knowledge in society can't be centrally aggregated, but markets allow individuals to act on their local knowledge, and prices coordinate their actions. Of course, real markets are messier. Behavioral economics shows that people aren't perfectly rational. Bubbles and crashes occur. Externalities aren't priced in. But even with these complications, the core insight remains. Markets are information processing mechanisms that simplify coordination. Prices are a simple summary, statistic, of complex underlying preferences and constraints. This is why market-based systems have proven effective at allocating resources. They leverage local knowledge and adapt to change without requiring omniscient planners. Democracy is a similar simplification for governance. Instead of trying to determine what's best through philosopher kings or divine revelation, democracy aggregates preferences through voting. It's not perfect. Arrow's impossibility theorem shows no voting system satisfies all desirable properties, but it's simple and robust. The legitimacy of government derives from consent of the governed, expressed through simple mechanisms. One person, one vote. Complex political questions are simplified to binary or multiple choice decisions. This is lossy compression. Nuance is lost, but it enables decision-making in large groups. The scientific method itself is a simplification. Hypothesize, predict, test, revise. This simple loop has proven extraordinarily powerful. It replaces authority, tradition, and intuition with empirical evidence. Not that authority and intuition are useless, but they're subordinated to evidence. The method is simple enough to teach, robust enough to self-correct. Bad theories are discarded, good ones refined. Over time, scientific knowledge converges toward truth, or at least toward useful approximations. The simplicity of the method belies its power. Peer review and replication are simplifying mechanisms in science. Not every scientist needs to repeat every experiment. Trust is distributed through community verification. Journals and conferences filter and disseminate knowledge. These institutions manage the complexity of scientific knowledge production, making it tractable for individuals to contribute without needing to know everything. Specialization emerges. Each scientist focuses on a narrow domain, but cross-disciplinary synthesis also occurs, finding connections and simplifications across fields. Let's return to neuroscience and the brain's remarkable compression abilities. Predictive coding is a theory that the brain constantly generates predictions about sensory input and only processes prediction errors. This is massively efficient. If the world is predictable, most sensory data is redundant. It matches expectations. Only surprises need processing. This explains phenomena like change blindness. We fail to notice changes because our predictions are accurate, and we don't process redundant confirmations. Consciousness itself may be a compressed summary of ongoing brain activity, representing only the most relevant information for decision-making. We're not aware of most neural processes, only their results. This compression makes cognition tractable. Full awareness of all brain activity would be overwhelming and pointless. The concept of working memory capacity, famously around 7 plus or minus 2 items, reflects another compression bottleneck. We can hold only a few chunks of information in mind at once. But chunks can be large. A single chunk might be a word, a phrase, a concept. Expertise involves building larger chunks, compressing more information into each unit. A chess master sees board positions as meaningful patterns, not individual pieces. This chunking enables expert performance. The master's working memory holds the same number of chunks as a novice's, but each chunk contains far more information. Learning is compression. Sleep's role in memory consolidation likely involves compression as well. During sleep, especially during slow-wave sleep, memories are replayed and integrated. Redundant information is discarded, connections are strengthened or pruned, schemas are updated. We wake with simplified, consolidated memories rather than raw recordings of experience. Dreams may reflect this consolidation process, as the brain searches for patterns, makes connections, and compresses the day's experiences into usable knowledge. Abstraction in mathematics is a form of compression taken to the extreme. Group theory doesn't care what the elements of a group are, numbers, matrices, symmetries, only that they satisfy the group axioms. This abstraction allows a single theorem to apply to infinitely many concrete cases. Category theory goes further, abstracting the notion of mathematical structure itself. These abstractions are powerful precisely because they compress. Prove something about categories, and you've proven it for groups, topological spaces, vector spaces, and countless other structures simultaneously. Mathematics advances by finding the right abstractions, the simplifications that reveal deep connections. The tension between reductionism and emergence is really a question of which level of description is simplest for a given purpose. Reductionism says complex phenomena reduce to simpler underlying laws. Emergence says new properties appear at higher levels that can't be easily predicted from lower levels. Both are true. Water molecules follow quantum mechanics, but we don't use Schrödinger's equation to predict weather. Fluid dynamics is the right level of description for weather, emergent, simple at its own scale. Reductionism is philosophically satisfying but practically limiting. Emergence acknowledges that simplicity exists at multiple levels, and the right level depends on the question. Consider temperature. At the microscopic level, temperature is mean kinetic energy of molecules, but we don't measure molecular velocities, we use thermometers. Temperature is an emergent property, simple and measurable, that summarizes microscopic complexity. It's real and useful despite being a statistical aggregate. Similarly, pressure, volume, and other thermodynamic quantities are emergent. They're the right variables for describing macroscopic systems. Trying to track individual molecules would be both impossible and pointless. The emergent description is the simple description. Coarse graining formalizes this. You average over microscopic details to get macroscopic variables. Information is lost, but predictive power is gained. With fewer variables, the system's evolution becomes tractable. Coarse graining is how we connect microscopic and macroscopic, how simplicity emerges from complexity through averaging. The central limit theorem is a mathematical expression of this. Averages of random variables tend toward normal distributions regardless of the underlying distribution, as long as certain conditions hold. Complexity in the parts gives simplicity in the aggregate. Dimensional analysis is another tool for finding simplicity. Physical quantities have dimensions: length, mass, time. Dimensional analysis constrains the form of physical laws. The Buckingham pi theorem states that any physically meaningful equation can be rewritten in terms of dimensionless parameters. This often dramatically reduces the number of variables. In fluid dynamics, Reynolds number combines velocity, length scale, viscosity, and density into a single dimensionless number that determines flow regime. Flows with the same Reynolds number are similar, regardless of their absolute scale. This is why wind tunnels work. Test a small model, match the Reynolds number, and results scale to the full-size object. Simplification through dimensional reasoning. Scaling laws appear throughout science. Metabolic rate scales with body mass to the 3/4 power across species, from bacteria to whales. This isn't obvious. You might expect surface area scaling, which gives 2/3 power, or volume scaling, which gives 1 power. The 3/4 power law reflects fractal-like distribution networks optimized for resource delivery. It's a simple empirical regularity with deep mechanistic explanations. Similar scaling laws describe how city infrastructure, corporate hierarchies, and biological branching networks scale with size. These power laws are signatures of underlying optimization principles, constraints that force systems into simple scaling relationships. Allometry, the study of how characteristics scale with size, reveals simplicity. Galileo noted that bones must be proportionally thicker in larger animals to support weight. Surface area scales as length squared, volume as length cubed. Constraints imposed by geometry and physics limit possible forms. This is why there are no elephant-sized insects. Their exoskeletons would collapse, and their respiratory systems can't scale. Physics constrains biology, simplifying the space of viable organisms. Evolution explores this space, but it's not arbitrary. It's structured by physical law. Optimal foraging theory predicts how animals should forage to maximize energy intake. The simple rule: spend time in a patch until the return rate drops below the average for the environment, then move on. This marginal value theorem, derived from simple optimization, predicts observed foraging behavior surprisingly well. Animals behave as if they're solving optimization problems, though they're not consciously calculating. Evolution has shaped behavior to approximate optimal solutions, and those solutions are often simple rules. Simplicity emerges through selection for efficiency. Signal detection theory, developed during World War II for radar operators, applies broadly. When detecting signals in noise, there's a trade-off between hits and false alarms. The optimal strategy depends on the costs and benefits, but it can be expressed simply. Set a decision threshold based on the likelihood ratio. This framework applies to medical diagnosis, witness testimony, animal vigilance, and more. A simple statistical model captures the essence of detection across domains. This is the power of mathematical modeling. Find the right abstraction, and diverse phenomena simplify into instances of the same underlying structure. Let's discuss network science more. The small world property, most nodes are a short path length apart, emerges in many networks. Social networks, neural networks, the internet, power grids, even neural networks in C. Elegans exhibit this. The Watt-Strogatz model shows that adding a few random long-range connections to a regular lattice creates small world properties. This simple mechanism explains why 6 degrees of separation hold in social networks. Small world topology is neither completely regular nor completely random. It's a simple intermediate structure that balances local clustering with global connectivity. It emerges naturally when networks grow with slight randomness. Scale-free networks with power law degree distributions also arise naturally. The Barabasi-Albert model uses preferential attachment. New nodes connect to existing nodes proportionally to their degree. Rich get richer. This simple growth rule produces scale-free networks. Such networks are robust to random failures. Most nodes have few connections, so removing them doesn't fragment the network, but vulnerable to targeted attacks on hubs. The internet is scale-free, which is why it's resilient to random router failures, but can be disrupted by attacking key routers. Evolution, citation networks, protein interaction networks, many show scale-free properties. Simple growth mechanisms produce simple large-scale structure. Modularity in networks is another form of simplicity. Communities or modules are groups of nodes more densely connected internally than externally. Detecting communities reveals hierarchical organization. The brain has modules corresponding to functional systems. Ecosystems have modules corresponding to guilds of interacting species. Software has modules corresponding to components. Modularity simplifies analysis and evolution. Modules can be understood somewhat independently, and changes within a module don't necessarily propagate to others. This is why modular systems are evolvable and robust. Hierarchical organization appears everywhere. Particles form atoms, atoms form molecules, molecules form cells, cells form tissues, tissues form organs, organs form organisms, organisms form societies. At each level, new properties emerge, and the level can be described simply in its own terms without referencing lower levels constantly. This hierarchical structure makes the universe intelligible. We can study chemistry without tracking quarks, biology without solving Schrödinger's equation, psychology without modeling neurons individually. Each level has its own simplifications, its own regularities. Feedback control theory explains how systems maintain stability despite perturbations. Negative feedback loops stabilize. If a variable increases, the feedback reduces it. If it decreases, the feedback increases it. Homeostasis in biology, body temperature, blood pH, glucose levels, relies on negative feedback. Engineering control systems use feedback to maintain set points. The mathematics of control theory is elegant, involving transfer functions, stability criteria, optimal control. Despite controlling complex systems, the principles are simple and widely applicable. Positive feedback loops amplify changes, leading to exponential growth or collapse. They're destabilizing but important. Positive feedback can drive phase transitions. Ice reflects sunlight, cooling the planet, forming more ice, a runaway ice house. Positive feedback in financial markets creates bubbles and crashes. In biology, positive feedback drives switch-like decisions, commitment to cell division, neural action potentials. These switches are often combined with negative feedback to produce oscillations or pulses, creating more complex dynamics from simple building blocks. Oscillators are simple yet ubiquitous. The pendulum, the mass spring system, the LC circuit, all exhibit oscillation. In biology, circadian rhythms, cell cycle oscillations, neural oscillations, ecological population cycles, oscillation is a common motif. The mathematics of oscillators is well understood. Limit cycles in phase space, characterized by amplitude and frequency. Coupled oscillators synchronize, as discovered by Huygens with pendulum clocks and explained by modern nonlinear dynamics. Synchronization is a simplification. Many individual frequencies collapse to a single collective frequency. Fireflies flashing in unison, neurons firing together, heart cells beating in concert. Synchronization creates coordinated, simple behavior from many independent components. The Kuramoto model captures synchronization simply. Oscillators with different natural frequencies are coupled, and above a critical coupling strength, they partially synchronize. This model, with just a few parameters, describes synchronization in diverse systems. It's an example of a minimal model capturing essential dynamics. The simplicity of the model, each oscillator represented by a single phase variable, makes analysis tractable while still explaining real phenomena. Self-organization is the spontaneous emergence of order. No external controller is needed. Local interactions suffice. Ant colonies build complex nests and organize foraging using simple local rules. No ant understands the global structure, but it emerges from stigmergy, indirect coordination through environmental modification. Ants follow and lay down pheromone trails, creating positive feedback that amplifies efficient paths. The colony finds shortest paths to food sources without any ants solving the problem explicitly. Simple rules, complex emergent behavior, simple functional outcome. Swarm intelligence in robotics mimics this. Simple robots with local sensing and simple rules can collectively perform complex tasks. Coverage, aggregation, sorting, construction. No central control is needed. Swarms are robust. Loss of individuals doesn't disrupt the collective. Swarms are scalable. Adding more units improves performance. This is simplicity through decentralization. Each unit is simple. Complexity is collective. Function is simple. Cellular automata, like the game of life, show how local rules generate global patterns. Each cell updates based on its neighbor's states. No cell has global information, yet patterns propagate, interact, persist. Gliders move across the grid, glider guns emit them periodically, still lifes remain static. These patterns are simple, discrete, and can be classified. More complex cellular automata can simulate any computation. They're Turing-complete, meaning they can perform any calculation a digital computer can. Simple local rules plus iteration yield universal computation. Wolfram's A New Kind of Science explored cellular automata systematically, classifying their behavior into 4 classes: fixed, periodic, chaotic, complex. Class IV automata, poised between order and chaos, exhibit the richest behavior, capable of universal computation. Wolfram argued that such simple programs could underlie natural phenomena, that the universe might be a giant cellular automaton. While controversial, the idea illustrates how simplicity at the rule level doesn't preclude complexity in behavior. The universe's laws might be simple programs running on a vast grid. Quantum computing relies on simplicity of quantum mechanics. Qubits, the quantum bits, exist in superpositions of 0 and 1. Operations are unitary transformations, reversible and information-preserving. Entanglement creates correlations. Measurement collapses superpositions. These are simple principles, but they enable exponential parallelism for certain problems. Shor's algorithm factors large numbers efficiently, threatening classical cryptography. Grover's algorithm searches unsorted databases quadratically faster. Quantum simulation models quantum systems exponentially more efficiently than classical computers can. Simplicity of quantum rules enables complexity of computation. Error correction in quantum computing is crucial and difficult. Qubits are fragile, easily decohered by environmental noise. Quantum error correction codes distribute information across multiple physical qubits, allowing errors to be detected and corrected without measuring the encoded information directly. The surface code is a leading candidate, requiring only nearest neighbor interactions on a 2D lattice. The fact that quantum error correction is possible, that fragile quantum information can be made robust, is non-obvious but provable. It relies on the linearity of quantum mechanics and the ability to perform collective measurements. Simplicity of quantum mechanics allows error correction. Complexity of implementation is engineering challenge. Let's think about the genetic code simplicity. 64 codons code for 20 amino acids plus stop signals. The code is redundant, multiple codons for most amino acids, and nearly universal across life. Why these 20 amino acids? They're not the only possible ones. Hundreds exist in nature. The selected 20 cover a range of chemical properties: hydrophobic, hydrophilic, acidic, basic, aromatic. They're buildable from simple precursors available in prebiotic chemistry. The code is frozen. Changing it would require simultaneous changes in tRNAs and proteins, lethal for complex organisms. The genetic code is a simple, robust solution locked in early in life's history. All life shares this code, a deep simplification that unifies biology. Protein folding is guided by simple physical principles. Hydrophobic amino acids bury inside. Hydrophilic ones stay on the surface. Hydrogen bonds stabilize structure. Yet predicting the folded structure from sequence is notoriously hard. Levinthal's paradox notes that random search would take longer than the universe's age, yet proteins fold in milliseconds. The solution: folding isn't random. Energy landscapes funnel proteins toward native states. Evolution has selected sequences that fold reliably. The energy landscape is simplified, with a single deep minimum corresponding to the native state, rather than a rugged landscape with many competing minima. Simplicity designed into sequences by evolution. AlphaFold, DeepMind's neural network, predicts protein structures with remarkable accuracy. It learned from known structures, capturing the principles that govern folding. The network's architecture is complex, but the underlying lesson is that protein folding, despite its complexity, has learnable regularities. The mapping from sequence to structure isn't arbitrary. It's structured, compressible, predictable. AlphaFold's success is evidence of simplicity hidden in the protein folding problem. CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing is simple in concept. A guide RNA directs a nuclease to a specific DNA sequence, which is cut. The cell's repair mechanisms then fix the break, allowing insertion, deletion, or modification of genes. This system evolved in bacteria as immune defense against viruses, but has been repurposed as a precise, programmable gene editing tool. The simplicity, just design a guide RNA matching your target, has democratized genetic engineering. Simple tools enable complex modifications. Synthetic biology aims to design biological systems from standardized parts. Biobricks are genetic modules with standard interfaces, like Lego pieces. Combine them to build circuits, genetic switches, oscillators, logic gates. The vision is to engineer cells as easily as we engineer electronics. This requires simplification. Abstract away molecular details. Design at higher levels using simple input-output relationships. Modularity and standardization make complexity manageable. It's early days, but progress suggests biology can be simplified through engineering principles. The central dogma of molecular biology, DNA to RNA to protein, is a simplification. There are exceptions: reverse transcription, RNA editing, prions. But the dogma captures the main information flow in cells. It's a simple schematic that organizes molecular biology, providing a framework for understanding genes, expression, and regulation. It's not the full story, but it's a useful simplification that has guided decades of research. Gene regulatory networks control development and physiology. These networks are complex, with genes regulating each other through cascades of transcription factors. Yet network motifs, recurring patterns like feedback loops, feed-forward loops, and toggle switches, appear repeatedly. These motifs are simple circuit elements that perform specific functions: maintaining states, filtering noise, generating pulses, making decisions. Complex networks are built from these simple modules. Understanding the modules simplifies understanding the networks. Evolution of cooperation is puzzling. Why help others at cost to oneself? Game theory provides simple models. In repeated interactions, strategies like tit-for-tat can sustain cooperation through reciprocity. Kin selection explains helping relatives. Shared genes mean helping them helps your own genes. Group selection, though controversial, can favor cooperation if groups with cooperators outcompete groups without. Reputation and indirect reciprocity, helping others because observers might help you later, also sustain cooperation. These simple mechanisms, operating in populations over time, generate the complex cooperative behaviors we observe in social species, including humans. The evolution of language and culture accelerates adaptation. Genetic evolution is slow, requiring generations. Cultural evolution can happen within a lifetime. Learned behaviors spread horizontally through populations, not just vertically from parent to offspring. Cumulative culture, building on previous generations' innovations, allows rapid accumulation of complexity. Yet the mechanisms are simple: imitation, teaching, communication. These simple processes of information transmission enable the vast complexity of human culture. Culture is a form of inheritance separate from genetics, and it exhibits its own evolutionary dynamics. Memes, in Dawkins' original sense, are units of cultural transmission. Ideas, tunes, fashions spread through populations like genes. They replicate, mutate, compete. The analogy to biological evolution is imperfect but suggestive. Successful memes are those that get copied, not necessarily those that are true or beneficial. This explains persistence of superstitions, urban legends, viral marketing. Memetics as a field hasn't fulfilled its early promise, but the core idea, cultural evolution, is sound. Simple replication dynamics explain complex cultural phenomena. The tragedy of the commons illustrates how individual rationality leads to collective irrationality. When resources are shared but costs are individual, each person's rational choice is to overuse the resource, leading to depletion. Simple game-theoretic models capture this. Individual incentives misalign with collective welfare. Solutions involve changing incentives, privatization, regulation, or creating mechanisms for collective decision-making. The problem is simple to state, common in reality: fisheries, climate pollution, and difficult to solve because it requires coordination. Public goods games model cooperation in groups. Contributing to a public good benefits everyone, but free riding benefits the individual more. Without enforcement, cooperation collapses. Yet experiments show humans cooperate more than rational self-interest predicts. We punish free riders, even at cost to ourselves. This altruistic punishment sustains cooperation. Simple models plus human psychology, fairness norms, social preferences, explain real behavior better than pure rationality. Simplicity lies in understanding deviations from rational models are systematic, predictable, part of human nature shaped by evolution in social contexts. Ultimatum and dictator games reveal fairness concerns. Offers that are too unequal are rejected, even though accepting any positive amount is rational. People share even when there's no strategic reason. Across cultures, norms vary but fairness matters. These simple experimental games reveal moral intuitions that govern social interactions. Understanding these intuitions simplifies predicting behavior in complex social situations. People aren't just maximizing personal gain, they're navigating social landscapes where reputation, trust, and fairness matter. Voting paradoxes like Condorcet's and Arrow's theorem show that aggregating preferences is non-trivial. No voting system satisfies all desirable properties simultaneously, yet societies function. Simple majority rule despite flaws is stable and legitimate. This is satisficing, not optimal but good enough. Many social institutions are like this. Simple, imperfect mechanisms that nonetheless enable coordination and cooperation. Perfection is unattainable, but simplicity makes mechanisms implementable and understandable, which matters more than theoretical optimality. Language itself has emerged and evolved without design. No committee dictated grammar, it evolved through use. Regularization occurs. Children learning irregular forms often overgeneralize rules, creating more regular patterns. Over generations, Languages simplify irregularities. Yet languages also complexify in other ways, borrowing words, developing new constructions. The overall trajectory isn't toward simplicity or complexity, but toward fitness for communication. Simplicity emerges where it helps. Regular grammar is easier to learn, but complexity arises where it helps. Synonyms allow nuance. Pidgins and creoles demonstrate language emergence. When speakers of different languages need to communicate, they create a pidgin, a simplified system with minimal grammar. The next generation, learning the pidgin as their first language, expands it into a creole with full grammatical complexity. This process, simplification followed by complexification, shows that human brains impose grammatical structure. The drive to grammaticalize, to create consistent patterns, is innate. Simplicity and structure emerge from our cognitive architecture. Mathematical notation has evolved toward simplicity. Early algebra used words. Symbolic notation came later. Today's notation is compact and powerful. Compare Leibniz's notation for calculus to Newton's. Leibniz's dx/dy is more intuitive and productive. Good notation makes relationships clear, calculations easier, generalizations obvious. It's a form of compression, representing complex operations simply. Mathematics advances partly through better notation. The right symbols make the simple underlying structure visible. The Peano axioms define natural numbers simply. 0 is a number, every number has a successor. 0 isn't a successor. Successors of different numbers differ. Induction holds. From these 5 axioms, all of arithmetic follows. This is dramatic simplification, reducing the infinity of numbers and their properties to a finite axiomatic base. It's the paradigm of mathematical rigor. State simple assumptions, derive everything else. Other mathematical structures have similar axiomatic foundations. Simplicity at the base, complexity through deduction. Gödel's incompleteness theorems show limits of simplicity. Any consistent formal system strong enough to express arithmetic contains true statements that can't be proven within the system. No finite set of axioms captures all mathematical truth. This seems to complicate the picture, but it also clarifies. Mathematical truth transcends formal systems. There's an objective structure we're discovering, not inventing. The simplicity is in the mathematical structures themselves, not in our formal descriptions, which are necessarily incomplete. In computation, the Church-Turing thesis asserts that all effective computation is equivalent. Anything computable by any algorithm can be computed by a Turing machine. This is a simplification. Diverse models of computation, lambda calculus, register machines, cellular automata, are equivalent in power. This universality is profound. It means computation is a well-defined, simple concept, despite the variety of physical implementations. It's why computer science is possible as a unified discipline rather than a disconnected collection of hardware studies. Computational complexity theory classifies problems by resources needed. P problems are solvable in polynomial time. NP problems have solutions checkable in polynomial time. The P versus NP question asks whether these classes are equal. Most believe they're not. Checking is easier than finding, but it's unproven. Regardless, the classification scheme simplifies the space of problems. Knowing a problem is NP-complete tells you it's as hard as thousands of other problems. This saves effort. Don't look for efficient algorithms where none likely exist. Focus on approximations, heuristics, or special cases. Simplicity through classification. The halting problem is undecidable. No general algorithm determines if an arbitrary program halts. This is a fundamental limit, proven by diagonalization. It tells us computation has intrinsic limits, that some questions are unanswerable in principle. Yet this simplifies our understanding. We know where the boundaries are. We don't waste time seeking impossible algorithms. We focus on decidable subsets or probabilistic guarantees. Limits clarify. Compression algorithms like Huffman coding and Lempel-Ziv exploit redundancy. Frequent symbols get short codes, rare ones longer codes. Average code length decreases if the data has structure. This is why text and images compress well. They're not random. The compressed file is simpler, fewer bits, but represents the same information. Compression is discovered simplicity, extracting signal from noise and redundancy. It's why zip files work, why JPEG images are small, why streaming video is possible. Error-correcting codes add redundancy to protect against corruption. The Hamming code, Reed-Solomon codes, turbo codes, LDPC codes, each adds structure so that errors can be detected and corrected. This seems to increase complexity, but it actually creates a simpler, more reliable channel. The receiver gets a clean message despite noise. Complexity is added intentionally to achieve simplicity of outcome. This is a recurring theme. Sometimes you must complicate the internal mechanism to simplify the external behavior. Cryptography secures communication through mathematical complexity. But the principles are simple: confidentiality, integrity, authentication. Public key cryptography, invented in the 1970s, uses asymmetric keys. The RSA algorithm is based on the difficulty of factoring large numbers, a simple mathematical problem that's computationally hard. The simplicity of the concept, everyone has a public and private key, revolutionized secure communication. Complex number theory underlies it, but users see simple interfaces. Encrypt with public key, decrypt with private key. Blockchain combines cryptographic hashing, digital signatures, and consensus mechanisms to create a decentralized ledger. The idea is simple: a chain of blocks, each containing transactions and a hash of the previous block. Altering history requires recomputing all subsequent blocks, which is prohibitively expensive if enough honest nodes exist. Simplicity of structure enables security without central authority. Whether blockchain fulfills its promise is debated, but the underlying simplicity is elegant. Neural networks, especially deep learning, seem complex: millions of parameters, many layers, nonlinear activations. But the basic units are simple: weighted sums followed by activation functions. Backpropagation, the training algorithm, is gradient descent applied via chain rule. The conceptual simplicity, adjust weights to reduce error, belies the empirical power. Networks learn representations by discovering patterns in data. The emergent complexity is in the learned weights, but the learning rule is simple. Convolutional neural networks exploit spatial structure in images. Convolution with small filters extracts local features, edges, textures. Pooling reduces dimensionality. Stacking layers builds hierarchical representations, edges to shapes to objects. This architecture is inspired by the visual cortex, where neurons have receptive fields and hierarchical organization. The design is simple: repeated application of convolution, activation, pooling, but effective. It's a case of the right inductive bias simplifying learning. Transformers, the architecture behind modern language models, use attention mechanisms. Attention computes relationships between all positions in a sequence, allowing the model to focus on relevant context. The mechanism is simple. For each position, compute query, key, and value vectors, then weighted sum values based on query key similarity. Despite simplicity, attention is powerful, enabling models to handle long-range dependencies without recurrence. The architecture's success is another instance of simplicity enabling complexity. Adversarial examples in machine learning reveal fragility. Tiny perturbations to inputs, imperceptible to humans, can fool networks into wrong predictions. This seems to complicate the picture. Are networks not really understanding? But it also simplifies. Networks optimize for training distribution, not human perception. Adversarial training, adding adversarial examples to training data, improves robustness. It's a simple fix that addresses a simple failure mode, overfitting to training statistics. Generalization is the core challenge in machine learning. A model that memorizes training data is useless. It must generalize to new data. Simple models generalize better because they can't memorize. Regularization enforces simplicity. Penalize large weights, prune connections, add noise. These techniques prevent overfitting. The bias-variance trade-off formalizes this. Simple models have high bias but low variance. Complex models have low bias but high variance. Optimal generalization balances these. In practice, deep learning succeeds by using vast data and implicit regularization from the optimization process, finding simple functions in high-dimensional spaces. The lottery ticket hypothesis suggests that large networks contain small subnetworks that, if trained in isolation, match the full network's performance. Finding these subnetworks is hard. You need the full network's training dynamics, but their existence implies redundancy. The full network is over-parameterized, containing simpler solutions. Pruning can often remove 90% of weights without hurting performance. This suggests neural networks discover simple representations despite their parameter count. Few-shot and zero-shot learning show that models can generalize from minimal data if they've learned the right abstractions. GPT-3 can perform tasks it wasn't explicitly trained for, given just a few examples or instructions. This is possible because it's learned rich representations of language. The model compresses human knowledge into its weights, and this compression enables generalization. Simplicity, compressed representations, enables flexibility. Meta-learning, or learning to learn, trains models to adapt quickly to new tasks. The idea is simple. Instead of learning one task, learn an algorithm that learns tasks efficiently. This abstracts learning itself, finding a simple procedure that generalizes across task distributions. It's another level of simplification, where the learned object is not a specific function but a learning strategy. We are pattern-finding beings in a patterned universe. Our minds compress experience into models, and the universe obliges by being compressible. This isn't anthropocentrism, it's consistency. We exist because the universe permits observers, and observers require structured environments. Structure implies simplicity. So, in asking why simplicity emerges, we're asking why we exist at all. And the answer is, we exist because simplicity exists. Complexity alone couldn't produce us. Simplicity, enabling structure, enabling complexity, enabling intelligence, closes the loop. We are simplicity becoming aware of itself.